My child, my little one, you came into this world with nothing waiting for you. Look at this place, look at this life, hunger, suffering, pain. Is this what I should give you? No, no, I will not let you suffer like this. I cannot watch you grow in this pain.
There is another child born the same night as you, a child that will never know hunger. That child will sleep on soft cloth, will drink milk, will grow in comfort. And you will grow here, in suffering, in shame? No, I refuse.
Even if the world calls me wicked, even if the gods judge me, I will not let you suffer. I will find a way. I will change your life. Even if it means taking another child's place.
In the ancient kingdom of Muri, where long red roads of earth stretched like tired snakes across the land and led to the great palace with tall gates made of heavy carved wood, people believed that the spirits of their ancestors watched every step they took. At night, when the moon was bright and full, old men sat outside their homes and told stories of the dead who still protected the living. Women lit small lamps near family shrines. Children stayed close to their mothers when the wind moved strangely through the trees. The kingdom was rich in beauty. Palm trees stood proudly in the distance. Birds sang loudly in the morning. The river shined like silver when sunlight touched it. But beauty did not mean every person lived well. Some people ate from full pots every day, while others stared at empty bowls and prayed for tomorrow. At the far edge of the kingdom, beyond the fine homes of traders and beyond the clean compounds of wealthy families, stood a small broken hut made of mud and old sticks. The roof was covered with dry leaves tied together in patches, and when rain fell, water found many ways to enter. This hut belonged to a poor couple named Nneka and Obinna. They were husband and wife, and though their life was hard, their hearts cared deeply for one another. Obinna was a tall man with strong arms and tired eyes. His hands were rough from years of digging soil, cutting weeds, and carrying heavy loads. He woke before the first rooster cried each morning. While the sky was still dark, he would rise quietly, wash his face with cold water, and prepare to go to the borrowed farmland where he worked. The land did not belong to him. It belonged to a rich man who lived in comfort and only came to collect his share after harvest. Obinna would work like a man farming for his own future, yet most seasons ended with little left for his family. Some years, the rain refused to come on time. The ground cracked open like dry skin. Seeds died before they could grow. Other years, pests came in numbers and ate the crops before harvest. When neither drought nor pests destroyed the farm, tax collectors from the palace would come, asking for grain, goats, or coins. Obinna would hand over what he had with bowed head, then walk home slowly, wondering how to feed his wife. Nneka watched all this with silent pain. She was a beautiful woman once known for her bright smile, but hardship had dimmed much of that light. Her wrappers were old and torn at the edges. Her cheeks had grown thinner from many hungry nights, yet her eyes were still sharp and deep, carrying thoughts she rarely spoke aloud. She tried to keep the hut neat. She swept the floor each morning, she patched the roof with leaves when she could, she fetched water from the stream and cooked whatever little food they had. Some days it was thin porridge, some days it was only roasted roots, some days there was nothing at all. On those days, she and Obinna drank water and slept early to forget the pain in their stomachs. Still, they loved each other. On cool evenings when work was done and the sun had gone down, Obinna would sit outside the hut beside Nneka and hold her hand. "One day," he would say softly, "things will change." Nneka would look at him and force a smile. "You always say that." "Because I must believe it. If I stop believing, I will break." She would squeeze his hand because she knew he spoke truth. That year, Nneka carried a child in her womb. It should have been a season of joy, but fear lived beside her every day. As her stomach grew rounder, so did her worries. Many nights she lay awake listening to the wind move through holes in the wall. She would place both hands on her belly and whisper to the unborn child, "My little one, what kind of life are you coming into?" Tears often slipped from her eyes before sleep came. She feared the baby would be born into hunger, sickness, shame, and endless struggle. She feared watching her child cry for food she could not provide. She feared the child growing old enough to ask questions she could not answer. One afternoon, she returned from the stream carrying a clay pot of water on her head. As she passed the center road, she stepped aside for a group of wealthy women walking proudly together. Their wrappers were clean and colorful. Coral beads shined around their necks. Their arms were full of bangles. Servants followed behind carrying baskets filled with yam, smoked fish, vegetables, and fruits. They laughed loudly as they walked. One woman said, "My husband bought me new beads from the traders." Another said, "My daughter refuses to eat plain yam now. She wants only meat stew." They all laughed again. Nneka stood still, balancing the heavy pot on her head while dust from their feet touched her legs. One of the women looked at her swollen belly and then looked away with no kindness. Nneka continued walking, but something bitter rose inside her chest. When she reached home, she placed the pot down hard enough for water to spill. "Why?" she cried to the empty hut. "Why are some children born into plenty while mine waits for suffering?" She sat on the floor and wept until her shoulders shook. That evening, Obinna returned carrying only a small bundle of cassava. He looked exhausted. Sweat covered his body. Dirt clung to his legs. He entered, smiling weakly. "Look, I got this from the farm owner's wife." Nneka stared at the cassava without joy. "Is this all?" He lowered his eyes. "It is all. Tomorrow may be nothing. Tomorrow may be more." "Always maybe," she snapped. Obinna froze. He knew her pain, yet the words still caught him. He sat beside her slowly. "Nneka, I am trying." "I know," she said, now ashamed. "I know you are trying, but trying does not fill the pot." Silence sat between them for a while. Then Obinna touched her belly gently. "Our child will know love." Nneka turned away. "Love is not food." Obinna had no answer. In that same season, joy filled the palace. Queen Lolo Ezine, wife of King Igwe Ezodo, was also expecting a child. The whole kingdom spoke of it. The king already had sons from the royal house, but many people longed for a daughter said to bring a softer blessing to the land. Old women said a royal daughter could unite families, calm disputes, and bring beauty to ceremonies. Men in the market argued over whether the child would look like the queen or king. Palace messengers moved in and out with urgency. Workers repaired walls, painted pillars, and polished royal seats. Cooks prepared storehouses full of grain, oil, spices, and dried meat for coming celebrations. Drummers practiced each afternoon until their hand ached. The sounds rolled across the kingdom like thunder. Dancers trained in open courtyards. Tailors stitched fine cloth. Goldsmiths shaped ornaments for the newborn child. Everywhere there was excitement. Children ran through streets shouting, "The palace baby is coming." One morning, Nneka went to sell a few firewood sticks she had gathered. As she neared the palace road, she saw palace women pounding yam in huge mortars while laughing and singing. Their wrappers were bright, their skin glowed with oils. Large pots boiled over firewood flames. The smell of rich soup filled the air and reached Nneka like a cruel hand. She stopped and watched. One young palace woman noticed her and smiled kindly. "Sister, come and see how we prepare for the royal child." Nneka stepped closer slowly. "There is so much food," she whispered. "Of course," the woman said proudly. "A child of the palace must be welcomed with honor." Nneka looked at the basket of meat, fish, vegetables, and spices. She thought of the cassava at home. "And if the child were born in a poor hut?" she asked quietly. The woman laughed lightly, not understanding the pain in the question. "Then the child would still cry like all babies." Others laughed with her. Nneka forced a smile and walked away before they could see tears in her eyes. Days passed. Her body grew heavier. Walking became slower. Hunger felt sharper. Sometimes she felt the baby move strongly inside her and would smile despite herself. "You are alive," she whispered. "You are fighting already." Yet fear always returned. One night, rain began suddenly. Water dripped through the roof in many places. Obina rushed about, placing bowls under leaks. Ineka sat in a dry corner, hugging her knees. "When the child comes," she said softly, "where will the baby sleep?" Obina looked around the hut and then at her. "Here, with us. And when rain falls, I will mend the roof better." "With what?" He said nothing. Ineka closed her eyes. "I am tired of hoping with empty hands." Obina knelt before her. "Listen to me. I know I am poor. I know I have failed many times, but I swear I will not stop trying." Tears stood in his eyes now. "Do not lose faith in me." Seeing his pain, Ineka reached for him. "I do not hate you," she whispered. "I hate this life." He laid his head on her lap and she stroked his hair while rain fell around them. As weeks moved on, the kingdom's joy only increased. Messengers announced that the queen's time was near. Drums sounded each evening from the palace. Women rehearsed sounds welcoming a princess. Men decorated the road with palm leaves. Even the poorest people smiled, hoping royal celebration might bring public gifts of food. But inside Ineka, darkness grew. Every sign of palace joy felt like an insult to her pain. She could not understand why one child would be welcomed with songs and gold, while another would be welcomed by hunger and leaking roofs. One afternoon, she sat alone outside the hut, rubbing her swollen feet. Children ran past, playing a game where one girl pretended to be a princess carried by others. Their laughter filled the air. Ineka watched them until they disappeared. Then she placed both hands on her belly and spoke bitterly. "If you were born there, they would sing for you. They would feed you milk and honey. They would wrap you in soft cloth. Here, I have only fear." That evening, smoke from cooking fires rose across the village. Rich homes smelt of soup and roasting meat. Eneka's pot held only water and leaves. Obina returned late, shoulders bent with tiredness. He had earned 2 small yams from helping another farmer repair a fence. He smiled when he showed them to her, but she could barely smile back. As they ate slowly, the sound of distant drums came again from the palace. Obina's face hardened. Yes, every day. Maybe when the child is born, the king will share food with the people. "And we should clap while they throw crumbs?" she asked sharply. Obina sighed. "Do not let bitterness eat your heart." "Bitterness," she said, rising painfully to her feet. "Tell me, Obina, if our child cries tomorrow from hunger, should I feed it patience? Should I feed it your hope?" He stared at the floor, wounded and helpless. After a moment, she regretted her words, but pride kept her silent. Night came softly. The moon rose bright above Umorie. Palace drums sounded in the distance, full of joy and promise. In the small hut at the edge of the kingdom, Ineka lay on her mat with tears sliding into her ears. Obina slept beside her from exhaustion, one hand resting near her belly, as if guiding both mother and child even in sleep. Ineka stared through a hole in the roof at the moonlight above. Why are some children welcomed with gold, while others arrive to hunger and leaking roofs? No voice answered her. Only the drums from the palace continued to beat, while in her chest, pain, envy, fear, and love battled through the long night. The night of birth came with a heavy sky that looked angry and full of secrets. Dark clouds covered the moon little by little, until no light remained above the kingdom of Omori. Wind moved through the trees with a deep sound, like spirits whispering in the dark. The birds had gone silent early. Dogs barked at nothing anyone could see. Old women sitting outside their homes looked upward and shook their heads. "This night carries power," one of them said. "A child born tonight will change many lives." Before long, thunder rolled across the sky so loudly that children ran into their mother's arms. Then rain began to fall, first in small drops. then in heavy sheets that beat roofs, trees, and earth like 1,000 hands. The red roads turned soft and muddy. Water rushed through narrow paths and around compounds. In the great palace, servants hurried through covered halls carrying hot water, cloth, oils, and bowls of herbs. Torches burned brightly against the storm. Guards stood at their places with wet shoulders and serious faces. Inside the royal bathroom, Queen Ezini cried out in pain as women attended to her. Sweat covered her body. Her hair clung to her face. She gripped the carved wooden sides of the bed as another wave of pain moved through her. "Breathe, my queen," the chief midwife said calmly. "The child is close." Queen Ezine closed her eyes and gasped. How much longer? Soon, very soon. Outside the room, King Eziodo paced back and forth like a caged lion. His rich wrapper dragged across the floor as he walked. Every cry from the queen tightened his chest. Two elders sat nearby, speaking softly, but the king heard nothing. At last, he stopped and asked, "Why is it taking so long?" One elder answered gently, "My king, children come in their own time." The king exhaled sharply and resumed pacing. Rain pounded the roof above them. Thunder shook the palace walls. Then suddenly, a thin cry rose from inside the room. It was the sharp cry of a newborn child. The king froze. The women inside began to laugh with relief. Moments later, the chief midwife opened the door with a broad smile. "My king," she said proudly, "the queen has delivered a daughter." Joy burst through the hall. The king lifted both hands to the sky. "The gods have blessed this house." He rushed inside. Queen Ezine lay weak but smiling, tears of relief on her cheeks. In her arms rested a tiny baby wrapped in soft cloth. The child's skin shone like wet bronze in the torchlight. Her fists opened and closed slowly. The king knelt beside the bed and touched the baby's cheek with trembling fingers. "My daughter," he whispered. Queen Ezine smiled faintly. "She is beautiful. She is more than beautiful. She is a blessing." Outside, palace drums began to beat loudly through the rain, sending the news across the kingdom. Messengers shouted under covered walkways. Servants danced. Women ululated in joy. The elders soon gathered and named the child Adaora, Child of Honor. The name was spoken with pride, and many repeated it with smiles. "Adaora has come," they cried. Across the village, far from palace light and comfort, another woman fought her own battle with pain. In the leaking hut at the edge of Umori, Ineka lay on a mat spread over the hard floor. Rainwater dripped into bowls placed beneath holes in the roof. Wind pushed cold air through cracks in the wall. A single small lamp flickered weakly. Ineka gripped the mat with both hands and cried out as labor tore through her body again and again. Her wrapper was soaked with sweat. Her breathing came in broken bursts. Obina knelt beside her helplessly, wiping her forehead with a cloth. Fear filled his eyes. "Hold on, Ineka. Please hold on." "I am trying," she cried through clenched teeth. "Do not tell me to hold on." He swallowed hard. "I will get Mama Udu. She knows Beth's." "Go then," she shouted, then screamed again as another pain struck. Obina rushed into the rain and returned some time later with an old woman who had helped many women deliver babies. The old woman entered, shook water from her wrapper, and went straight to work. "More fire," she ordered. "More cloth, and stand where I can send you quickly." Obina obeyed every command. He moved like a frightened child. The hours dragged on. Thunder shook the hut. Rain kept falling. Neka cried, groaned, prayed, cursed the pain, then prayed again. At one point, she gripped Obina's wrist so hard he winced. "If I die," she gasped, "take care of the baby." "Do not say that," he cried. "You will live." "If I die, "You will live," he said again, tears now in his eyes. At last, after one final long cry that seemed to tear the darkness open, the baby came. A small voice filled the hut. The old woman smiled with tired satisfaction. "A girl," she announced. Obina fell to his knees in gratitude. "Thank you! Thank you!" He laughed and cried at once. Neka lay weak and shaking as the child was cleaned and wrapped in an old but clean cloth. When the baby was placed against her chest, the child quieted almost at once. Neka looked down at the tiny face pressed near her heart. The baby's eyes were closed. Her mouth moved softly. Her fingers were so small they looked like carved seeds. For a moment, Neka forgot hunger, fear, and pain. Tears rolled down her face. "My child," she whispered. Obina leaned close, smiling like a man who had found treasure. "She is strong," he said. "Look at her lungs. She cried like a warrior." The old woman chuckled. "This one came to live." Obina kissed Neka's forehead. "I will get herbs for you, and better firewood, and maybe milk if anyone will sell to me tonight." "Now?" the old woman asked. "In this rain?" "My wife needs strength. My daughter too." The old woman nodded. "Go then, but hurry back." Obina bent and kissed the baby's head. "I will return soon, little one." He smiled at Neka. "Everything will be well now." Then he ran into the storm. The old woman soon left also, promising to return at first light. "Rest if you can," she told Neka. "Keep the child warm." Then she disappeared into the rain. And so, Neka was left alone. The hut grew quiet, except for rain striking the roof and water dripping into bowls. The small lamp burnt low. Neka held her daughter close and looked around the room. The walls were cracked. The roof leaked. There was almost no food, no fine cloth, no dry cradle, no medicine, no promise. The joy that had touched her only moments before began to fade under a rising wave of fear. The baby stirred and made a soft sound. Neka looked into the tiny face and suddenly saw years ahead. She saw the girl crying from hunger. She saw her wearing torn wrappers. She saw other children mocking her. She saw sickness with no healer to call. She saw her growing into a woman bent by suffering just like herself. Neka's breathing quickened. "No, no, no." Outside, from far away, through wind and rain, palace drums thundered across the night. Their sound was rich, joyful, proud. They were announcing the birth of Princess Adaura. Neka froze. She listened as the drums rolled again. In her mind, she saw a different room. Warm fire, clean sheets, bowls of milk, women singing, soft cloth, safety, honor. Her own child would never know any of it. She looked down at the baby against her chest. "Why should you suffer because you came through me?" she whispered. Tears fell onto the child's face. "Why should another baby sleep on silk because she came through a queen?" The drums sounded again. Something dark and desperate cracked open inside Neka's heart. She rose slowly, despite pain shooting through her body. Her legs shook. Blood and weakness made her dizzy, but another force moved her. She wrapped her own child tightly in cloth and tied another wrapper around herself. "Forgive me," she whispered, though she did not know to whom she spoke. She opened the door and stepped into the storm. Rain hit her face like stones. Mud swallowed her feet. She moved through darkness, one arm protecting the child, the other steadying herself. Each step hurt. Her body had only just given birth, yet she kept going. Palace drums guided her through the rain. By the time she reached the palace road, celebration had made the place careless. Servants rushed in and out carrying food and drink. Some guards stood laughing beneath shelter, distracted by joy. Others drank from calabashes. No one expected danger from a bleeding woman in the storm. Nneka slipped through shadows along the wall, head lowered. Her heart beat so hard she thought it would betray her. Inside the palace, music and laughter filled the halls. She followed the sound of women praising the newborn. Torchlight flickered across polished floors. She hid behind pillars when footsteps came near. At last, she found the chamber where the baby rested. Queen Izine, exhausted, had been moved to another room to be cleaned and attended to. A nurse sat beside the cradle, but sleep pulled at her eyes after long labor. Wine from the celebration stood half-finished nearby. She nodded once, twice, then drifted. Nneka stepped forward trembling. Before her, in a carved cradle lined with soft cloth, lay the royal baby. The child slept peacefully, wrapped in fine fabric, warm and safe. Nneka stared in shock at how small she was. "Just a child," she whispered. Her own baby moved in her arms. For a long moment, she could not breathe. "I can still leave," she thought. "I can still go home." But then thunder crashed and the nurse stirred. Fear drove her hands. Quickly, shaking violently, she lifted the palace child and laid her own daughter in the cradle. Then she wrapped the royal child against her chest. Her fingers fumbled. Tears poured from her eyes. "Forgive me," she whispered again and again. The two babies barely made a sound. Nneka backed away, nearly falling. She turned and fled through the halls, through shadows, through rain. No cry followed her. No hand seized her shoulder. She reached the road and ran until pain forced her to slow. Dawn had not yet broken when she returned to the hut, carrying the true princess. Inside, she collapsed to her knees, breathing hard. The baby beside her began to cry softly. Nneka stared at the baby, then at the empty mat where she had given birth. "What have I done?" she whispered. Yet, even then, she laid the child down gently and covered her with cloth. Soon after, the door burst open and Obinna entered soaked with rain, carrying herbs, milk, and firewood tied on his back. His face shone with excitement. "Nneka, I found everything I could." He dropped the load and rushed to her side. "Are you well? Is the baby well?" Nneka could barely speak. "Yes," she said weakly. He looked at the baby beside her and smiled with tears in his eyes. "My daughter." He lifted the baby carefully, not knowing he held the king's child. "You have waited for me, little one." He kissed her forehead. "You have changed my life already." Nneka turned her face away so he would not see her tears. Obinna sat beside wife and child, laughing softly with joy while the first pale light of dawn crept through holes in the wall. He never knew that while he searched for help in the storm, the world had changed forever. The years moved forward like a slow river, carrying secrets beneath calm water. In the poor edge of Muri, in the same leaking hut where rain still found its way through patched leaves and broken roof spaces, the royal child grew up in the arms of people who believed she was their own flesh and blood. Nneka and Obinna named the girl Chiamaka, because after the pain of birth and the joy they thought heaven had given them, they wanted a name that spoke of beauty and grace. Obinna loved the child with a full and open heart. He carried her on his shoulders when she was small. He sang to her in the evenings when work was done. He would return from the farm tired and bent with dust on his legs. Yet, when Chiamaka ran to him, he always smiled as if the sun itself had entered the hut. "My little bird," he would say, lifting her high. "Did you miss me?" Chiamaka would laugh and hold his neck. "Yes, father, you are late." "The soil wanted to keep me," he would joke, "but I told it my daughter was waiting." Nneka watched these moments with a heart divided in two. She loved the child deeply, for she had nursed her, bathed her, held her through fever, and watched her first steps. Yet, each smile from Chiamaka also reminded her the truth. This was not the daughter she had birthed. This child belonged to the palace. Sometimes, when Chiamaka slept, Nneka would stare at her face for long minutes, tracing the shape of her nose and lips with her eyes. "Whose eyes do you carry?" she would whisper. "Mine through love, or the queen's through blood?" Then guilt would rise like fire inside her chest. Life in the hut remained hard. There was never enough food. Chiamaka learned hunger early, not as a strange visitor, but as something that lived often beside them. Many mornings, she ate only thin porridge before walking with other girls to fetch water from the stream. Her wrappers were patched in many places. Her sandals, when she had them, were worn thin. Some seasons, she had none and walked barefoot on hot earth. Yet, there was something about her that poverty could not bend. She moved with calmness, even as a child. She did not complain much. She thanked her mother for every meal, even when it was small. She greeted elders with respect and lowered eyes, but never with fear. When other children fought over fruits or toys made of sticks, Chiamaka would step between them. "There is enough space for all of us," she would say in a soft but steady voice. Strange thing was, children listened. One afternoon, two boys wrestled in the dust over a carved wooden wheel. They shouted insults and hit each other until mothers came outside. Before any adult reached them, little Chiamaka walked over carrying a water pot nearly half her size. She set it down and said, "If you break each other, who will enjoy the wheel?" The boys stopped and looked at her. "He took it first," one cried. "No, it is mine," the other shouted. Chiamaka picked up the toy and held it behind her back. "Then no one gets it until both of you sit." Her tone was so serious that both boys sat in the dust. The women nearby laughed in surprise. She gave each boy a turn, pushing the wheel, and peace returned. "That child speaks like an elder," one woman said. Another nodded. She was born with sense. Even animals seemed to trust her. Goats that buttered other children let Chiamaka touch their heads. Chickens followed her when she scattered grain. A stubborn dog that barked at strangers lay quietly beside her when she sat outside. Old men noticed such things and murmured among themselves, "There is something uncommon in that girl." Obina would hear these words and puff with pride. "He takes after her mother," he would say. Nneka would look away. Across the kingdom, inside the great palace, Nneka's true daughter lived another life entirely. The child named Adaora grew among polished floors, carved pillars, clean courtyards, and many servants. She slept on soft bedding. She wore fine cloth and bracelets made for children of rank. Nurses carried her when she was tired, maids combed and oiled her hair. Tutors came to teach letters, history, music, and royal manners. Queen Izine loved the girl with a whole mother's heart. She kissed her cheeks, told her stories, and watched her sleep with deep joy. King Izeudo also adored his daughter and boasted of her beauty before visitors. Yet, from her earliest years, Adaora seemed untouched by the careful shaping expected of palace children. She hated sitting still for long lessons. She pulled beads from her neck and tossed them aside. When maids dressed her in rich cloth, she would run outside and stain it in the dust. "Princess," the maids would cry, "please stop." Adaora would laugh and keep running. One morning, a tutor spread scrolls and symbols before her. "Today, you must learn the names of noble houses," he said. Adaora looked through the open window toward the kitchens, where smoke rose and women laughed. "Do noble houses know how to cook yam?" she asked. The tutor blinked. "That is not today's lesson." "Then today's lesson is boring," she said, and slipped away before he could stop her. The tutor later stood before the king in shame. "My king, the child does not focus." King Ezeudo waved a hand. "She is young. Children are wild before they are wise." Queen Izine smiled, but worry touched her heart. Adaora preferred the kitchens to the throne room. She sat with cups and asked endless questions. She sneaked food to guards. She listened to servants gossip and laughed loudly at stories. She often spoke plainly, not with the careful softness expected of royalty. When a noblewoman once praised a necklace she wore, Adaora replied, "It is heavy and ugly." The room fell silent. Queen Izine apologized later, embarrassed, but the queen still loved her child deeply. At night, she would hold Adaora close and say, "My daughter, one day you must lead with grace." Adaora would yawn and answer, "Can grace climb trees?" Queen Izine could not help laughing, though concern stayed behind her smile. Meanwhile, Ineka lived with eyes always watching. Every market day, she took vegetables, firewood, or woven mats to sell if she had any. The market near the palace was full of sound and movement. Traders shouted prices, women bargained loudly, children chased one another through legs and baskets. Drummers sometimes played for coins. On days when the palace sent servants to buy goods, Princess Adaora sometimes came too, refusing to remain indoors. She walked ahead of maids, curious about everything. Ineka would freeze whenever she saw her. There she stood, her own blood child, dressed in fine cloth, wrists shining, cheeks healthy and full. Yet Adaora often behaved like no princess at all. She would kneel beside pepper sellers and ask how they dried their peppers. She would laugh with butcher boys. She would reach for roasted corn and eat it standing in the road while maids begged her to return to the carriage. Once, she passed directly before Ineka's stall. Ineka's hand shook so badly she nearly dropped her basket. Adaora looked at her with bright eyes. "Mother seller, how much is this fruit?" she asked kindly. Ineka could barely breathe. Hearing her own child call another woman mother seller pierced her heart. "Two shells," she whispered. Adaora frowned. "Too much. One shell." A maid gasped. "Princess." Adaora grinned. "Then 1.5." Ineka stared, then slowly smiled through pain. "Take it," she said. "No payment." Adaora shook her head. "No, work must be honored." She placed coins in her palm and ran off laughing. Ineka stood frozen long after she was gone. Those coins felt hot in her hand. That night she cried where no one could hear. She had wanted wealth for her child, and the child had returned to her as a customer who did not know her face. Chiamaka, the true princess, grew stronger each year in hardship. By age 7, she could balance a water pot steadily. By 8, she helped patch walls. By 9, she could carry bundles of wood with careful strength. Yet even while carrying burdens, she held herself with natural dignity. She thanked people who mocked her. She shared food even when she had little. When Obina came home sick one season with fever, Chiamaka sat by him wiping his face with wet cloths. "Do not die," she whispered. "Who will joke with me?" Obina smiled weakly. "Then I must live." Nneka watched her and felt both pride and torment. This child was born for more than this hurt, she thought. But fear kept her mouth closed. Fear of punishment, fear of losing both girls, fear of Obina's hatred, fear of the king's anger, fear of truth itself. Sometimes she imagined confessing. She imagined walking to the palace gates and falling to her knees. But then she pictured chains, disgrace, and Chiamaka torn from the only home she knew. So silence ruled her. Peace never came. At night, she often woke sweating from dreams. In some dreams, 2 little girls stood on opposite sides of a river calling for her. In others, Queen Ezine held a baby that turned into smoke. Sometimes she dreamed drums beat loudly while blood ran through palace halls. She would wake gasping and Obina would ask, "What troubles you?" She always answered, "Nothing, just bad dreams." One evening after market day, Obina sat outside mending a farming tool while Chiamaka braided grass nearby. Nneka stared at the sunset without speaking. Obina glanced at her. "Maybe thoughts are freer than people," she said quietly. He chuckled. "What burden do you carry that I cannot help lift?" She almost spoke then. Her throat tightened. She looked at Chiamaka laughing in the dust. She looked at Obina's tired, loving face. She saw in her mind the palace child calling her Mother Sela. But fear rose again like a wall. Only tiredness, she said. Obina nodded sadly. Then rest tonight. She wanted to scream the truth into the evening sky, but instead she stood and went inside to stir the pot. In the palace that same night, Queen Ezine watched Adaora refuse to wear a necklace prepared for ceremony. It scratches, the girl complained. A princess must sometimes endure discomfort, the queen said gently. Adaora crossed her arms. Then maybe I do not want to be a princess. The queen stared at her, troubled by words spoken in innocence. Later she said to the king, she is unlike the children of this house. King Eziodo laughed. Then she will be remembered. You never worry. I worry about enemies, war, famine, not a child who climbs trees. Yet even when the queen slept, even he thought for a moment of how strange Adaora often seemed. Still, he pushed such thoughts away. Children, he told himself, grow differently. Back in the hut, rain began softly outside. Chiamaka curled beside Nneka on the mat. Mother, she whispered, yes. Why do you look sad when I am happy? Nneka's heart stopped. Do I? Sometimes. Chiamaka touched her face with tiny fingers. Do not be sad. When I grow big, I will build you a strong house with no holes. Tears filled Nneka's eyes. She pulled the girl close. Sleep, my child. Chiamaka rested against her and soon drifted off. Nneka held her in the dark, listening to rain strike the patched roof. She had stolen destiny, but no gold entered her heart. Only love mixed with guilt, fear mixed with longing, and a silence that grew heavier each passing year. Peace never entered her home. Years passed over the kingdom of Umori, like seasons crossing the sky, and the two girls who had begun life on the same stormy night grew farther apart in the eyes of the world, yet closer to the truth hidden beneath it all. The difference between them deepened like a river after heavy rain, wider each year, stronger each season, carrying both blessing and sorrow wherever it moved. In the poor quarter at the edge of the kingdom, Chiamaka was no longer the small child who followed goats and carried half-filled water pots. She had grown into a tall young girl with calm eyes, steady hands, and a presence that made people look twice when she passed. Her clothes were still patched, her sandals were still worn thin or missing. Hunger still visited her home often, yet hardship did not make her rough. Instead, it gave her patience. Poverty did not bend her spirit. Instead, it sharpened her kindness. Every morning, she woke before sunrise, swept the compound, fetched water, lit the fire, and helped her mother prepare what little food they had. If there was one yam, she cut it into 3 pieces. If there was no salt, she did not complain. If neighbors had less than they did, she found a way to share. Once, during a dry season, an old widow named Mama Kosi came trembling to their hut. My daughter, the old woman said, I have not eaten since yesterday. Nneke looked sadly at the small bowl of porridge meant for the family. Before she could speak, Chiamaka took the bowl and placed it in the old woman's hands. Eat first, she said. We will find another way. The old woman's eyes filled with tears. May heaven remember you. After the woman left, Nneke said softly, You gave away all we had. Chiamaka smiled. Then we are equal now. Hunger will not visit only her. Nneke turned away quickly so her daughter would not see the tears gathering in her eyes. Chiamaka learned quickly no matter what task stood before her. If she saw someone weaving baskets once, she could try it the next day. If a trader explained numbers, she remembered them. If elders told stories of the kingdom, she listened deeply and asked thoughtful questions. Many people began to seek her opinion even while she was still young. 2 women once argued loudly at the stream over whose turn it was to fill their pots. Voices rose, insults flew. Others gathered to watch. Chiamaka stepped forward carrying her own empty pot. "If both of you leave angry," she said calmly, "the water remains happy and you remain foolish." The women glared at her. One snapped, "This is not your matter." Chiamaka nodded. "Then continue. Let the whole village hear that two grown women fought a stream and lost." Laughter burst from those nearby. The women grew ashamed, then quiet. Chiamaka suggested each fill half their pots first and then return in order. They accepted. An old man nearby shook his head in wonder. "He speaks with the tongue of judgment," he said. There was also something in the way Chiamaka moved that people could not explain. Even when carrying firewood on her head or sweeping dusty ground, she stood straight. Her steps were measured. Her greetings were respectful but never fearful. When she entered crowded places, people often shifted aside without knowing why. It was as if some silent authority walked before her. Old women sitting in shade would whisper to one another as she passed, "Look at that child. She walks like one born in a palace. See her neck, her posture, the way she turns her head. No poor heart teaches such things." Obina heard these whispers and swelled with pride each time. To him, Chiamaka was proof that goodness could bloom in dry soil. Called her his blessing openly and often. When he returned from the farm, he would announce loudly, "Where is the blessing that entered my heart?" Chiamaka would laugh and run to greet him. He would place rough hands on her shoulders and say, "One day people will know your worth." Sometimes, before neighbors, he boasted, "When this girl was born, fortune stepped into my house." Each time he spoke so warmly, Neka felt pain stab through her chest. She would lower her eyes and busy her hands with grinding pepper or stirring a pot. Obina never noticed the shadow crossing her face. He thought she was only tired. One evening, he sat outside with friends, sharing palm wine in small cups. "Your daughter is uncommon," one friend said. "Even my wife says so." Obina laughed proudly. Because she came from uncommon parents. The men laughed. Neka, listening from inside, nearly dropped the spoon in her hand. She pressed a fist against her mouth to hold back a cry. Across the kingdom, in the palace filled with polished floors and carved pillars, Adaora also grew into a striking young girl. She was beautiful in a way that drew eyes immediately. Her skin glowed with health, her hair was thick and carefully styled by palace women. Fine wrappers, bracelets, and beads were always prepared for her. But beauty did not bring calm. Adaora was bold, lively, restless, and hard to contain. She disliked sitting through stiff customs. She mocked stiff customs. She often escaped supervision and disappeared into places no princess was expected to be. While tutors waited with scrolls and books, Adaora climbed courtyard trees. While noble girls practiced graceful dance steps, she raced stable boys through the yard. While ministers discussed royal behavior, she sneaked into the kitchens to taste stew from pots and laugh with cooks. "Princess," a maid would cry, "please come down from that tree." Adaora, balanced on a branch, would grin and answer, "Then climb up and get me." Another day, the royal etiquette teacher bowed and said, "When elders speak, a future queen lowers her gaze with modest dignity." Adaora copied his bow in exaggerated fashion, then burst into laughter. "Like this?" The teacher sighed deeply. "No, princess. Then maybe dignity is not for me," she said and walked out. Palace servants loved her energy but feared the trouble it brought. She treated workers kindly, often more kindly than nobles. She asked guards about their families. She carried food to a sick maid herself when others would have ordered it done. Yet, she also ignored rules without shame. Once, during an important visit from neighboring chiefs, she entered the hall late with muddy feet after chasing goats outside. Ministers nearly fainted. King Eziudo covered embarrassment with a laugh, but afterward he frowned in private. Adaora must learn restraint, one minister added. The people must trust their future ruler. Another added, she is brave and charming, yes, but rulership requires discipline. King Ezeudo dismissed them with raised hand. She is still young. But even he could not fully ignore their concern anymore. Queen Ezinne suffered more quietly. She loved Adaora with all the tenderness of a mother who had waited long for a daughter. She brushed her hair, prayed for her, defended her, and kissed her brow at night. Yet inside, doubt slowly grew. Why did the girl resist every polished custom of the palace? Why did noble lessons slide off her like water off stone? Why did she see more allies among traders and laborers than among royal circles? One evening, the queen sat before her mirror while a maid removed jewelry from her neck. "Did it fail her?" she asked softly. The maid was shocked. "My queen?" "Perhaps I was too soft," she murmured. "Perhaps I was too soft. Perhaps I failed her spirit because I feared it so much. Perhaps I let her become wild." "No, my queen, the princess has a good heart." Queen Ezinne sighed. "A good heart is precious, but a throne asks for more." Later that night, she entered Adora's room and found the girl asleep with one ankle dirty from climbing somewhere she should not have climbed. The queen smiled sadly, cleaned the foot with cloth, and whispered, "How do I guide you where you do not wish to go?" Nneka's suffering deepened with every passing year because she watched both lives twisting under the weight of her secret. On market days, often she saw Adara arrive with attendants. The princess would step from a fine carriage only to run immediately toward ordinary people. She laughed loudly, bargained over fruit, questioned blacksmiths, and tasted roasted corn from roadside fires. Sometimes she sat on overturned baskets speaking with laborers while maids begged her to stand. Nneka watched hidden behind stalls or baskets. "That is my blood," she thought. "My child loves the ground because I came from the ground." Then she would turn and see Chiamaka in rough cloth, carrying wood with the grace of nobility. And that one carries the palace in her bones. The truth became a punishment that followed Nneka everywhere. She loved Chiamaka because she had raised her. She loved Adara because she had birthed her. Yet, loving both now tasted bitter. Her love carried poison. It warmed and burned at the same time. Some nights, Chiamaka massaged Nneka's tired legs after long market days. "Mother, you work too hard," the girl would say. Nneka would stroke her hair and think, "I stole your rightful life." Other days, Adara, passing the market, would greet Nneka kindly without knowing who she was. "Mother Seller, keep the best oranges for me next time." Nneka would smile weakly while thinking, "I gave away your mother's arms." Once, during a village festival, fate placed both girls in the same open square at the same time. Chiamaka had come carrying baskets for sale. Adara had slipped away from attendants to watch dancers among common people. Their eyes met briefly across the crowd. Neither knew why the moment felt strange. Adara walked over boldly. "You are the girl who always stands like a chief," she said. Chiamaka smiled. "And you are the princess who walks like a hunter." Adara laughed loudly. "Then both of us are wrong things." "Or right things in wrong places," Chiamaka replied without thinking. The word struck Nneka like thunder. She stood nearby gripping her basket so hard her fingers hurt. The girl spoke a little more, laughing easily as if something natural joined them. Then attendants found Adara and led her away. Chiamaka returned to work. Nneka went home shaking. That night she could not eat. Obina noticed. "What troubles you now?" he asked gently. "You carry storms inside you these days." "I am only tired," she said, as always. He touched her shoulder. "Then let me carry more of the burden." She almost told him everything. The words rose to her lips like prisoners running to freedom. But then she imagined his face changing, his trust dying, Chiamaka torn away, soldiers at the door. Fear sealed her mouth. "I am only tired," she lied. Obina looked unconvinced but said no more. In the palace, ministers continued worrying over Adora's future. During one council meeting, an elderly advisor said carefully, "My king, the princess has many gifts. Courage, warmth, sharp wit. But the people must also see steadiness. King Ezeodu leaned back heavily. Speak plainly. She does not yet carry the spirit of rulership. Silence followed. Queen Ezine lowered her eyes, pain touching her face. Later, in private, she said to the king, "Perhaps it is my fault." "No," he answered. "She is simply herself." And if herself is not enough? He had no quick answer. Back in the poor quarter, Obina returned one evening with a small fish and celebrated as if it were treasure. "Tonight we feast," he declared. Chiamaka laughed and clapped. Nneka smiled faintly. As they ate, Obina looked at his daughter with shining pride. "When you were born, blessing entered my heart. I tell everyone." Chiamaka blushed. "Father, you speak too much." "I have little else to boast of," he said warmly. Nneka's eyes filled. She stood and went outside pretending to fetch water. In the dark yard, she leaned against the wall and cried silently. She had wanted to save one child from suffering and give another wealth, but instead she had wounded every life tied to hers. Yet, morning always came, and with it, chores, greetings, market noise, palace duties, laughter, hunger, and the endless need to continue. So, Nneka arose each day and carried her secret like a hidden stone inside her chest. She loved both girls with all she had left, yet her love now carried poison. The annual festival of ancestors came to the kingdom of Umori with bright color, loud music, deep pride, and old fear. It was the most sacred celebration of the year, the day when the living honored those who had gone before them. People believed that on this day, the ancestors listened closely, watched clearly, and sometimes spoke through signs no one could ignore. For many days before the festival, the kingdom prepared with great energy. Roads were swept clean. Shrines were washed and decorated with white chalk and fresh leaves. Families repaired fences, painted walls, and cooked food enough for guests. Women pounded yam in large mortars, men slaughtered goats and sharpened ceremonial staffs. Children ran about singing festival songs and imitating dancers. Traders from far villages came early to set up stalls with cloth, beads, spices, carved masks, pots, sandals, and roasted meat. Drummers tested their instruments from morning until sunset. Everywhere there was movement, excitement, and the smell of wood smoke mixed with rich soup. In the palace, preparations were even grander. Princess Adaora was to appear before the people in full honor and strike the royal drum, a sacred drum said to answer only to rightful authority and clean ancestral blessing. King Ezeodo ordered that the finest cloth be brought out. Queen Ezine supervised every detail herself. "The people must see strength and beauty," she told the maids. "Today is not a common day." Adaora, now grown into a bold young woman, sat while attendants braided and decorated her hair. She looked bored and restless as bracelets were placed on her wrists and coral beads around her neck. "Must I wear all this weight?" she complained. One maid smiled nervously. "Princess, today all eyes will be on you." "Then let them look quickly," Adaora said. "I wish to breathe again." Queen Ezine entered and dismissed the maids for a moment. She stood before her daughter, with love and worry mixed together. "Adaora, please," she said softly, adjusting one bead strand. "Today, honor the customs of this house." Adaora sighed. "Mother, I always honor you. Then honor me by taking this seriously." Adaora looked at her mother's face and saw the deep hope there. Her voice softened. "I will try." Queen Ezine kissed her forehead. "That is enough for now." In the poor quarter, Chiamaka prepared for the same festival in a very different way. She had no rich cloth, only a clean wrapper carefully mended by Nneka the night before. She tied it neatly and carried herself with quiet grace. Their family had little food, yet Nneka managed to prepare a small pot of yam and sauce for the morning. Obina was cheerful like a child. "Today we dance, we eat what we can, and we forget farm worries for one day," he declared. Chiamaka laughed. "You only wish to drink palm wine with your friends." "That too," he said proudly. Nneka forced a smile, but her chest felt tight since dawn. The festival of ancestors always unsettled her. It was the day of truth, memory, and unseen eyes. She feared signs. She feared whispers. She feared what old powers might reveal. "You are pale," said Obina while tying his wrapper. "Are you sick?" "Just tired," Aneka answered. "Then stay home if you need rest." "No," she said quickly. "I will come later." She did not want to be alone with her thoughts. By mid-morning, the central square of Umore overflowed with people. Drummers played rhythms that shook the chest. Dancers spun in colorful cloth. Masked performers moved through crowds like spirits returned to earth. Smoke from roasted meat rose into the bright air. Laughter mixed with prayer. Elders sat in honored places beneath shade canopies. Children climbed walls and trees for better views. Guards kept pathways open for the royal family. At last, horns sounded and the palace procession entered. King Ezeldo walked with royal dignity. Queen Ezine shone in fine cloth and jewels. Beside them came Princess Adaura, beautiful and fierce, dressed magnificently, though her eyes still carried impatience with ceremony. The crowd cheered loudly. "Long live the king! Long live the princess!" Adaura lifted a hand and smiled, but her smile was more natural toward common people than nobles. Near the center of the square stood the sacred royal drum on a carved wooden stand. It was large, dark, polished with oil and decorated with symbols of past rulers. Many believed the drum did more than make sound. It judged hearts. It recognized rightful lines. Whether true or not, everyone respected it deeply. The chief drummer stepped forward and bowed to the king. Then he turned to Adaura. "Princess," he said loudly, "strike the royal drum and let the ancestors hear the child of this house." The crowd grew silent. Even children hushed. Queen Ezine clasped her hands. King Ezeldo stood tall. Adaura stepped forward confidently, though she rolled one shoulder as if the beads annoyed her. She took the ceremonial stick, looked at the drum, and struck it hard. A flat, dull sound came out. Not a proud thunder, not a rich boom, only a weak, dead note like wood striking wet cloth. The square froze. Some thought perhaps she had missed the center. The chief drummer's eyes widened. Adaura frowned and struck again, harder. The sound came dull once more, lifeless and hollow. Murmurs moved through the crowd like insects through grass. "What was that? Why no voice? Strike again." Adaura's face reddened. Angry now, she hit the drum a third time. Again, the sound was poor and empty. Queen Ezine's breath caught. King Eziodo's jaw tightened. The chief drummer quickly stepped forward, bowed, and struck the drum himself. It answered with a full, deep boom that rolled across the square. Gasps spread everywhere. The difference was impossible to ignore. Adaura stepped back, eyes blazing with humiliation. "The stick is bad," she snapped. But no one believed that. Ministers exchanged worried glances. Elders whispered behind their hands. King Eziodo raised his hand sharply. "Enough. Continue the festival." Music resumed, but unease had entered the day. Adaura sat stiffly beside her mother. Queen Ezine touched her arm. "Do not mind it." Adaura pulled away. Everyone minded it. She stared at the crowd with wounded pride. Later that same day, while performances continued, Chiamako walked through the square carrying a large clay pot of water on her head. Neka had sent her to bring fresh water from the stream because traders were buying quickly and water sold well during festivals. Chiamako moved carefully through the crowd, apologizing politely when squeezed by dancers and children. She wore simple cloth, no jewels, no signs of rank, yet people still shifted aside without knowing why. Near the sacred drum, a group of boys ran suddenly across her path, chasing one another. To avoid collision, Chiamako turned sharply. Her elbow brushed the side of the royal drum by accident. The pot wobbled. She steadied it. At that exact touch, the drum exploded with sound. A mighty thunder burst from it, though no stick had struck it. The boom rolled through the square like storm clouds breaking open. Birds flew screaming from nearby trees. Children ducked. Dancers stopped mid-step. The ground itself seemed to tremble. Chiamako froze in shock. The crowd stared at her, then stared at the drum, then back at her. "Who touched it?" someone shouted. "It was the poor girl," cried another. Chiamako quickly lowered the pot and bowed her head. "Forgive me, it was an accident." The chief drummer walked slowly around the drum, touching it, as if checking for hidden trickery. There was none. Old women crossed themselves in fear. Men muttered prayers. Adaora stood from her seat, eyes burning with disbelief. King Eziodo rose halfway, then sat again. Queen Izine looked from Chiamako to the drum and felt a chill she could not explain. Neka, standing near a market stall, nearly dropped the tray in her hands. Her knees weakened. She gripped the stall for support. "No," she whispered. "No, no, no." Obina beside her only laughed nervously. Her daughter startles drums now. He looked proud, not understanding the terror in Neka's face. Before anyone could settle, another sacred ceremony was announced to calm the mood, the presentation of the white royal horse. This horse was no ordinary animal. It was kept for state rights and believed to sense truth better than men. It was brought out adorned with clean cloth and bells. Its coat shone bright under the sun. A handler led it before Princess Adaora. According to custom, the horse would bow one knee before the future ruler. The handler gave the signal. The horse snorted and turned his head away. He tried again. The horse stamped angrily. He tugged the reins. It jerked backward. Laughter from some corners quickly died under fear. Sweat formed on the handler's brow. He whispered soothing words and tried once more. The horse refused again, ears flat, body tense. Adaora stepped forward boldly. "Give me the reins." She took them and stared into the horse's eyes. "Kill now," she commanded. The horse tossed his head so sharply that bells rang and beads on her wrist snapped, scattering across the ground. Gasps spread through the square. Then, as if pulled by another call, the horse turned suddenly away from Adaora and walked toward the crowd. Guards moved aside. It stopped before Chiamaka, who still stood confused with her water pot nearby. Slowly, gently, the white horse lowered its head and bent one front knee. Silence swallowed the whole square. Even the drum ceased. Elders stared with open mouths. One old chief whispered, "This cannot be." Another replied, "Yet we are seeing it." Adaora's face burned with shame and fury. "This is madness," she shouted. Chiamaka stepped back, frightened. "I did nothing," she said. "Please, I did nothing." King Eziodo stood. "Take the horse away." Guards rushed forward. The animal resisted until Chiamaka moved aside herself. Then it allowed itself to be led off. The festival no longer felt joyful. It felt watched. Troubled glances passed between every important face in Umori. By evening, the people gathered near the ancestral shrine, where the chief priest, Dibia Onwudiwe, would seek meaning in the signs. He was an old man with white markings on his skin and eyes that seemed to look beyond ordinary sight. Fires burned around the shrine. Smoke rose in twisting shapes. The crowd stood far back in fearful silence. King Eziodo and Queen Ezine arrived with attendants. Adaora came too. Chin lifted stubbornly, though pain showed in her eyes. Chiamaka had been ordered to remain nearby with her family. Ineka trembled so badly Obina held her elbow. "You are shaking like fever has taken you," he whispered. "It is only the smoke," she lied. Dibia Onwudiwe began to chant and circle the fire. He shook rattles, poured libation, and called upon the ancestors of the land. His voice rose and fell. Sweat poured down his face. Suddenly, his body stiffened. The rattles dropped. He swayed violently, then spoke in a voice that sounded deeper than his own. "Hear and fear," he cried. Women wailed softly. Men knelt. The priest pointed toward the palace, then toward the crowd. A river has been diverted from its rightful path. Gasps broke out everywhere. He pointed again, eyes wide and unseeing. What was planted in one soil grows in another. What belongs at the center stands at the edge. What belongs at the edge sits at the center. Panic moved through the gathering like smoke in wind. Some people cried openly. Others backed away from one another. Queen Ezine clutched the king's arm. Adaura stared at the priest, pale and furious. Chiamaka looked lost and frightened. Nneka's vision blurred. She nearly collapsed where she stood. Obina caught her quickly. "Nneka," he cried, "what is happening to you?" She could not answer. Her buried crime had just been named without names before the whole kingdom. King Eziodo stood forward with thunder in his voice. "Silence!" Guards struck staffs against the ground. "No one speaks carelessly of this. The festival is ended. Return to your homes." But orders could not stop fear. People whispered before they even turned away. "The throne has been deceived. A child was changed. The ancestors are angry. Who is true? Who is false?" Through farms, streets, and markets, the rumors ran faster than horses. Back at their hut that night, Nneka sat shaking on the mat, unable to hold a cup steadily. Obina knelt beside her and touched her forehead. "You are not hurt. Then why this fear?" he asked gently. It was only gossip and old men speaking in smoke. Nneka covered her face and sobbed. Obina wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "Listen to me," he said. "No prophecy can enter this house unless we invite it. We are small people. Palace troubles are not ours." She cried harder at those words. If only he knew that the palace troubles slept beside him for years. He stroked her back, believing she was frightened by rumors alone, still unaware that the woman in his arms carried the kingdom's greatest sin. After the festival of ancestors, the kingdom of Umore did not return to peace. Music still played in markets, farmers still went to their fields, children still ran through dusty roads, and smoke still rose from cooking fires each evening. But something unseen had changed. Suspicion now lived among the people like a silent animal hiding in tall grass. Every conversation bent toward the same question. Who truly belonged where? Why had the sacred drum answered one girl and refused another? Why had the white horse bowed before a poor farmer's daughter? Why had the chief priest spoken of a river diverted from its rightful path? King Eziodo did everything he could to stop open talk. He ordered guards to punish anyone spreading wild stories in public. He commanded drummers to play louder during gatherings and distract people from rumor. He instructed ministers to speak only of harvest, taxes, and border matters. Yet, whispers cannot be beaten with staffs. They move under doors and travel through cooking smoke. They hide inside greetings and market laughter. So the king chose another path. If truth existed, he would find it himself before the kingdom tore itself apart. One moonless night, he called his closest advisor, Chief Nadozi, and 3 trusted guards into a private chamber. Torches burned low. No servants were allowed near the door. "What is said here does not leave this room," the king said in a hard voice. All bowed deeply. "I want every birth record, every midwife, every servant who attended the palace on the storm night when Princess Adaura was born. Search quietly, ask quietly, threaten quietly if needed. If there is nothing, I will bury rumor forever. If there is something," he stopped, jaw tight. Chief Nadazi lowered his eyes. "We understand, my king." Queen Eziene, though not present at first, soon learned something had begun. The king grew distant and slept little. He often stared at Adaura during meals with an expression the queen had never seen before. Love fighting doubt. At last, she entered his chamber one night and shut the door. "What are you doing?" he answered. "Protecting this house." "From whom?" "From lies." "Then why do you look like a man chasing truth?" He turned away, because sometimes they wear the same face. The queen's breath trembled. "Do you believe our daughter is not ours?" He did not answer quickly enough. Tears filled her eyes. "How can you even think it? Because the drum was silent? Because the horse knelt elsewhere? Because the priest spoke before all people?" Queen Eziene's voice broke. "And because of that, years of motherhood become dust?" The king closed his eyes. "I do not know what to believe. That is why I search." So the search began in secret. Old scrolls were brought from storage rooms. Palm leaf records of births, attendants, visitors, and ceremonies were examined by torchlight. The names of palace workers from that time were listed. Some were dead, some had moved away, some were too old to walk without help. Guards visited them quietly, one by one. Midwives were summoned and questioned. One old midwife, nearly blind, sat trembling before the king's men. "Tell us what you remember," Chief Nadozi demanded. "I remember rain," she said weakly. "I remember the queen's labor was long. I remember joy when the child cried. Did anyone strange enter the chamber? Not while I watched. Did you sleep?" She lowered her head. "For moments, maybe. I was old even then." Another servant denied knowing anything until guards slammed a spear butt beside him. He began to cry. "I know nothing. I only carried water." Others truly remembered little. Years had washed details away. Yet, small fragments slowly surfaced like broken pots in a riverbed. An elderly palace maid named Maji, now bent with age, was brought in from a distant village. She listened to the questions, rubbed her hands and frowned into memory. "That night," she said slowly, "there was much celebration after the birth. People moved in and out. Wine flowed. I was sent to fetch dry cloth." She paused. "When I returned before dawn, I saw a woman in the corridor." Chief Nadazi leaned forward. "What woman?" "I did not know her. She kept her face low. Her wapa was wet. She moved like someone in pain." "Why did you not stop her?" "I thought she was a helper or relative from the women's side. Many people were there." "Did she carry anything?" The old maid closed her eyes hard. I think she held a bundle close to her chest." The chamber went still.
Another former nurse remembered something else. "The newborn princess had a small mark here," she said, touching her own shoulder, "like a thin moon, crescent-shaped. I told the queen it was a lucky sign." "And Princess Adora now?" asked the advisor. The nurse looked frightened. "I have never seen such mark on her." The king ordered that Adora's shoulder be checked quietly. No crescent mark. Then, with careful planning, Chiamaka was observed during a village ceremony where sleeves were rolled to wash before eating. There, clear on her shoulder, rested a pale crescent birthmark. When the report reached the king, he crushed a cup in his hand without realizing it. Queen Izine wept alone that night until dawn. Meanwhile, Adora noticed the palace changing around her. Once, servants laughed freely in her presence. Now, many fell silent when she entered. Ministers who used to flatter her watched with measuring eyes. Tutors bowed too stiffly. Guards whispered. Even Queen Izine's warmth became troubled. Queen Izine still embraced her, still asked if she had eaten, still adjusted her hair with loving fingers, but confusion now lived behind her gaze. Adora felt it like cold wind. One morning, she entered the breakfast room full of her usual energy. "I beat the stable boys at racing again," she announced proudly. No one laughed. King Eziodo only nodded absently over documents. A minister stared too long at her face. Queen Izine forced a smile. Adora slowly sat down. "What is wrong with everyone?" she asked. "Nothing," said the king too quickly. "Then why do I feel like a stranger in my own home?" No one answered. She pushed the food away untouched and walked out. Later, she confronted her mother in private. "Tell me the truth," Adora demanded. "People look at me as if I stole something." Queen Izine's eyes filled. "No one says that. They do not need to say it." "Adora, am I still your daughter?" The queen grabbed her hands. "Always." But the pause before the word always hurt more than a slap. Adora pulled away and left in tears she refused to let anyone see. Hurt became anger. Anger became rebellion. She began leaving the palace more often, escaping into the village where titles mattered, yes, and eyes felt kinder. There she walked among traders, laborers, potters, farmers, and children who treated her with curiosity rather than suspicion. She breathed easier among ordinary noise than palace silence. She ate roasted corn standing beside road fires. She helped women carry baskets just to shock their attendants. She sat with old men hearing stories under trees. "Princess, your hands will spoil," maids warned when she lifted sacks. "Then let them spoil usefully," she answered. During one of these wanderings, she met Chiamaka properly. They had spoken briefly before at festivals, but now they sat longer. Chiamaka was selling woven mats beside the market road when Adora approached without fanfare. "You always look busy," Adora said. Chiamaka glanced up and smiled. "And you always look lost." Adora laughed loudly. "Good, then sit with me, lost girl." "I cannot. I must sell." Adora dropped onto an overturned basket anyway. "Then I will help you sell." She shouted at passing customers. "Buy these mats. They are stronger than palace promises." Chiamaka nearly choked laughing. "Please stop before they arrest both of us." But people gathered, amused, and bought more than usual. When business slowed, they talked. Adora spoke openly, as was her nature. Everyone in the palace walks as if balancing pots on their heads. Too careful, too false. Chiamaka tied rope around sold mats. Careful is not always false. There, you speak like an elder again. And you speak like thunder. Adora smiled. Then maybe that is why I like you. Something easy formed between them from the first real conversation. It made no sense. They were from different worlds, yet each felt strangely known by the other. Over the following weeks, Adora visited often. Sometimes she came with guards who stayed back in frustration. Sometimes in plain clothes with only one maid. Sometimes alone by slipping through side gates. She and Chiamaka walked to the stream, argued about silly things, shared fruit, laughed under trees, and watched market life together. Adora admired Chiamaka's peace. "How are you calm with so little?" she asked while sitting outside the hot area. Chiamaka thought for a moment. "I am not always calm. I just do not shout every feeling." Adora snorted. "Then I fail already." Chiamaka smiled. "You feel like fire. Fire can cook food or burn houses. Learn which." Adora stared, then burst out laughing. "You really were born old." Chiamaka, though poorer, possessed something Adora envied deeply, a home warmed by genuine affection. Obina teased Chiamaka lovingly, praised her openly, and treated her presence as joy.
Even when there was no food, laughter sometimes filled the hot yard. Neka, though often burdened and anxious, fussed over Chiamaka's meals, clothes, and tired feet with real motherly care. Adora watched these small moments with quiet hunger in her heart. Palace life gave luxury, but love there had become tangled with expectation, politics, and now suspicion. One evening, Obina returned from the farm to find Adora sitting on a low stool eating cassava with Chiamaka. He froze in shock, then bowed awkwardly. "Princess." Adora waved him up. "If you bow lower, you will hit the ground. Sit." Obina laughed nervously and obeyed. "You honor our poor home." "Your home has more laughter than mine lately," she said before she could stop herself. A shadow crossed her face. Chiamaka noticed but said nothing. Chiamaka admired Adora in different ways. She loved the princess's fearless spirit, her refusal to worship status, her bold honesty, and the way she treated workers like people. "You say what others only think," Chiamaka told her once. "Because thoughts rot when trapped too long," Adara replied. "And you?" "I think before speaking." "Yes," Adara said dryly. "I have noticed." They laughed again. Yet, every time Neka saw them together, terror gripped her like cold hands. She would stand in the doorway watching the two young women share jokes, braid each other's hair, or argue playfully over market prices, and she felt fate weaving its final cloth before her eyes. Blood called to blood, even without names. Sometimes the girls' heads bent close in the same way. Sometimes they laughed with the same sudden spark. Sometimes they frowned at once. Nneka saw too much resemblance and nearly lost breath. One afternoon, she found them both helping grind pepper outside the hut. Adaora's hands were stained red and she laughed at her own clumsy effort. Chiamaka corrected her grip. Nneka dropped the bowl she carried. It shattered. Both girls jumped up. "Mother, are you hurt?" Chiamaka asked. Adaora also rushed forward instinctively. "Careful!" she cried. The two voices rose together, same concern, same tone. Nneka stared at them and began to shake. "I am fine," she whispered. "Just dizzy." After they moved away, she sat alone behind the hut and wept into her wrapper. Obinna found her there later. "Again?" he asked softly. "You have been haunted since the festival." "Leave me," she said weakly, but he sat beside her anyway. "Whatever shadow follows you, speak it. 2 shoulders carry better than 1. She almost confessed. She almost ended it all. Yet when she imagined soldiers taking Chiamaka, Adaora hating her, Obinna's face breaking, her courage died. "There is nothing to say," she murmured. He sighed deeply. "Then I will sit in your silence." And he did. In the palace, Queen Ezine secretly asked the maid, "Where has Adaora gone again?" "To the village, my queen." The queen looked toward the window with tears she did not let fall. "Even now she runs from us." But perhaps, unknown to all, she was not running from them. She was being drawn elsewhere. So days passed with hidden investigations in the palace, growing friendship in the village, and dread in Nneka's heart. Each time Adaora and Chiamaka stood side by side, laughing like sisters who had simply found each other late, Nneka trembled, sensing fate weaving its final cloth. Morning came heavy over the kingdom of Umori, as if even the sky carried worry. The air felt still. Birds sang less. Smoke rose slowly from cooking fires. People moved through roads and markets with the restless energy of those waiting for something they could not name. Since the festival of ancestors, no house had been free from rumor and no mind had been free from questions. In Nneka's hut, fear had become a daily visitor. She slept little. She startled at footsteps. She stared often into space as if seeing another life far away. Chiamaka noticed it. "Mother, are you sick?" she asked gently while sweeping the yard. "No," Nneka said quickly. "Only tired." Obinna watched his wife with growing concern. "Tiredness does not make a person shake when someone knocks," he said one evening. "What burden are you hiding from me?" Nneka turned away. Nothing. But there was no strength left in the lie. That same morning, before the sun climbed high, 2 shrine messengers arrived at the hut, carrying staffs wrapped in white cloth. Their faces were serious. They stood at the entrance and called out, "Nneka, wife of Obinna, the chief priest summons you to the shrine at once." The clay cup in Nneka's hand slipped and shattered on the ground. Her knees nearly gave way. Chiamaka rushed to hold her. Obinna frowned. "Why would the shrine call my wife?" One messenger answered, "We were told only to bring her." Nneka's heart pounded so loudly she could hear it. She knew at once that the time of hiding had ended. No dream could warn more clearly. No prayer could delay it now. She looked at Obinna, then at Chiamaka, and pain crossed her face like shadow over water. "I will go," she whispered. "I am coming too," Obinna said firmly. "No," Nneka replied in panic. "Stay. If the shrine calls my wife, I walk beside her." His voice carried the calm strength she had leaned on for years. That made it hurt more. Chiamaka stepped forward. "Mother, should I come?" Nneka touched her cheek with trembling fingers. "No, my child, stay home." She almost said more. She almost fell to her knees and begged forgiveness before the walk even began. But the words stuck behind years of fear. The road to the shrine seemed longer than ever before. Villagers watched from doorways and stalls as Ineka walked between the messengers. Obina followed close behind despite her protests. Some people whispered, others only stared. Ineka kept her eyes lowered. Every step felt like walking toward judgment already decided. The shrine stood at the edge of a sacred grove where tall trees blocked much of the sun. White chalk marks covered stones near the entrance. Masks of carved wood hung on posts. Bowls of ash, feathers and old offerings lined the path. Smoke from burning herbs drifted through the air. The smell of earth, fire and leaves pressed against the senses. Inside the open shrine hall, elders sat in a half-circle on carved stools. Their faces were grave. Dibia Nwudiwe, chief priest of the kingdom, stood before the sacred fire, wearing white cloth and strings of old charms. His eyes seemed sharper than ever, as if they had looked too long at hidden things. Nearby stood guards, ministers and palace witnesses. Neka saw Queen Ezine's chief maid among them. She saw Chief Nadozi. She saw fear in every face. Obina stopped in confusion. "What is this?" he whispered. No one answered him. Dibia Nwudiwe raised one hand. The room fell silent except for the crackle of fire. "Eneka," he said slowly. "Step forward." Her legs shook so badly she nearly stumbled. Obina moved to help her, but guards blocked her gently. "Let her come alone," said the priest. She stepped before the sacred flames. Heat touched her face. Around her hung ancestral masks staring with painted eyes. It felt as though generations watched from wood and smoke. "Place your hand upon the earth," Dibia commanded. A patch of bare soil lay before the fire. Ineka knelt and touched it. Her fingers trembled against the ground. "This earth carries truth. The dead beneath it hear lies. Speak now and speak cleanly. What happened on the storm night when the princess child and your child were born?" Ineka's breath stopped. Obina stared at her, confused. Murmurs passed through the elders. Dibia's voice deepened. "We have searched records. We have heard witnesses. We have seen the mark upon the shoulder. We ask not from ignorance, but for truth. Speak." Ineka tried to answer, but a broken sound came out. Tears flooded her eyes. She swallowed hard. Dibia struck his staff once on the ground. "Speak!" The years of buried guilt burst open like a wound cut wide. Ineka cried out and bent low, forehead nearly touching the earth. "Yes," she screamed. "Yes, I did it." Gasps filled the shrine. Obina took one step back as if struck. Queen Ezine's maid covered her mouth. Dibia's face remained hard. "Say all of it." Ineka shook violently. "That night, the rain, the thunder, I gave birth in hunger and darkness. My child cried in my arms. I looked around my hut and saw only suffering. No food, no roof, no hope." Her voice cracked into sobs. "Then I heard palace drums. They announced the princess. I imagined silk, milk, warmth and safety. I imagined my child starving beside me while another slept in gold. I clawed at my own chest. Something evil entered my heart." Fear became madness. Obina whispered, "No." But no one looked at him. Neka continued through tears. "When Obina left to find herbs, I wrapped my baby and went into the storm. I entered the palace while people celebrated. I found the royal child. I changed them. I took the king's daughter and left mine there." Cries rose around the shrine. Some elders bowed their heads. Others closed their eyes in pain. Neka beat the ground with her fists. "I returned before dawn. Obina came home smiling. He believed the child beside me was ours. I let him believe. I let everyone believe. Her cries echoed through the shrine. Even men known for stern hearts wiped tears from their eyes. She lifted both hands toward the elders. Punish me, curse me, kill me if you must, but know this, I loved both girls. I loved them until love itself became pain. Obina stood frozen like a tree struck by lightning. His mouth opened, but no words came. Then slowly, the truth reached the deepest part of him. The daughter he had carried on his shoulders, taught to laugh, defended with pride, called blessing for years, had not been born of Eneka's body. Yet she was the child of his heart. And the wife he had trusted through hunger, storms, and long years had hidden the kingdom's greatest crime beside him every night. His knees buckled. He fell hard to the ground. Choked sounds came from his throat. No! No! He looked at Nneka with eyes that no longer knew what they saw. All these years, he whispered. All these years. Nneka crawled toward him. Obina, forgive me. He recoiled as if her touch burned. Do not touch me. The words were soft, but they cut deeper than shouting. Tears rolled down his face. I shared my hunger with you. I shared my bed, my labor, my trust. I defended your silences. I thought your sadness was hardship. His voice broke. It was this. Nneka reached again. I was afraid. And I was a fool, he said. He rose slowly, unsteady, eyes empty. He looked around the shrine as though everything familiar had turned strange. Then he walked away without another word. Nneka sprinted after him, but he did not turn back. In the palace, news was carried swiftly to Queen Ezine and King Eziudo. Though much had been suspected, hearing confession turned fear into living pain. Queen Ezine stood in her chamber when the chief maid, crying openly, repeated Nneka's words. At first, the queen only stared. No, she said faintly. No, she lies. My queen, she lies. But then, memory rushed in. Adaura's different spirit, the drum's silence, the horse's bow, the crescent mark. Her strength left her. She collapsed to the floor, clutching her chest. Women rushed to lift her, but she cried out, My baby! Where was my baby all these years? She wept until no one in the room could hold back tears. I nursed another child while my own carried water in dust. I kissed another child while mine slept beneath leaks. Yet, even in grief, love for Adaura remained. That made the pain crueler. And what of the girl who called me mother? She whispered. Must I lose her too? King Eziudo received the news in the council hall. Rage shook him like storm wind. He hurled a stool across the room. He struck the wall with his fist until blood came. Bring her here! Chain her! Let all see what she has done! Ministers bowed in fear, but beneath the king's fury lived sorrow too deep for noise. Years had been stolen from everyone. He had missed his true daughter's first words, first steps, childhood laughter. He had poured love into Adaura without knowing she was not of his blood, yet she was still the child he raised. His house had become both victim and witness of a lie. He sank heavily onto his throne and covered his face with one hand. What kind of father was I that truth lived in my kingdom and I did not know it? In the village, Chamaka returned from fetching grain to find people staring strangely. Children stopped talking when she passed. Two women whispered openly, That is her, the palace one. Chamaka frowned, confused. At the hut, she found Nneka absent and Obina sitting outside like a broken man. His eyes were red. He looked years older than morning. Father, she asked softly. He lifted his gaze to her, and pain flooded his face. He almost called her daughter as always, but the word caught in grief. Still, love rose stronger than blood. Come here, he said quietly. She knelt beside him. What has happened? He touched her hair with trembling hand. Everything, he whispered, and nothing that matters here. He pulled her into an embrace so tight she could barely breathe. Then he wept openly into her shoulder. Chiamaka held him, frightened and confused. As sunset bled across the sky, Queen Ezine was led from the shrine under guard, not in chains, but under watch. Her face was swollen from crying. Villagers parted to let her pass. Some spat near the road, some only stared in pity. She looked toward her hut and saw Obina sitting with Chiamaka. For one moment, she saw the life she had built through sin and love together. She whispered, "I am sorry," though no one could hear. The truth was out. The hiding had ended. Nothing could return to what it had been. King Eziodo's rage shook the palace. Queen Ezine drowned in grief. Obina walked broken, and Nneka stood empty before the ruins of her own making. The confession of Nneka spread through Umure faster than Hamatan fire through dry grass. By sunrise after the shrine judgment, every market, farm path, cooking yard, and drinking place carried the same story. People spoke in low voices, in shocked voices, in angry voices, in pitying voices. Some said the ancestors had saved the kingdom. Some said the kingdom had been cursed from the day of the exchange. Some blamed hunger. Some blamed greed. Some blamed weak guards, sleeping servants, careless nobles, and fate itself. But while the people argued, two young women sat in different homes, feeling their lives crack beneath them. In the poor hut at the edge of the kingdom, Chiamaka sat on the floor beside the doorway where she had often shelled beans, woven mats, and watched evening skies. Nothing in the hut had changed, yet everything had become strange. The patched roof was the same. The mud walls were the same. The low stool Obina used was the same. The small clay pots, the broom, the cooking stones, the smell of smoke and cassava, all the same. Yet now, people said she belonged in the palace. They said she was daughter of the king. They said she was the true princess of Umori. The words felt like clothing made for another person. Chiamaka stared at her hands. These hands had carried water, washed bowls, weeded farms, comforted neighbors, and patched walls. How could they now be royal hands? She felt no joy, only pain. Pain for Obina, whose face looked hollow since the truth came out. Pain for Nneka, though anger and love fought inside her. Pain for Adaora, who must now feel every flaw beneath her feet turning uncertain. Obina sat nearby in silence, sharpening a tool that needed no sharpening. He had done the same movement for a long time without noticing. Chiamaka finally spoke. "Father!" He stopped at once. Tears entered his eyes because she had still called him father. "Yes," he answered softly. "Am I still allowed to call you that?" He threw the tool aside and moved to her quickly. "Do not ask such a thing again." He held her shoulders firmly. "Listen to me. I did not plant you in your mother's womb, but I planted yam because of you. I woke before dawn because of you. I laughed because of you. I feared sickness because of you. I thanked heaven because of you. If that is not fatherhood, then words have no meaning." Chiamaka burst into tears and embraced him. He held her as if afraid the palace might snatch her any moment. In the palace, Adaora stood before mirrors she no longer trusted. Gold bowls, polished floors, carved pillars, fine curtains, servants waiting at every turn. Everything that had once been normal now felt borrowed. She touched the bead necklace at her throat and pulled it off suddenly. "Take these things away," she told the maid. "Princess, do not call me that," she shouted. The maid trembled and backed away. Adaora looked around the grand room and whispered, "Whose room is this now?" She had learned she was born to poverty. The blood in her veins belonged not to kings, but to the hut at the edge of the kingdom. Every silk wrapper felt like a lie draped over her body. Every meal felt taken from another mouth. Yet, deeper than shame was fear. She feared losing Queen Ezine, whose lullabies had put her to sleep. She feared losing King Eziodo, whose proud smile had followed her through childhood. She feared being sent away like a mistake corrected too late. Queen Ezine entered quietly and found Adaora sitting on the floor, not on the bed. Her hair was loose, her eyes were swollen. "My child," Queen Ezine said. Adaora looked up sharply. "Am I still that?" Queen Ezine's lips trembled. She knelt and took Adaora's face in both hands. "The child I fed, the child I held through fever, the child whose laughter filled these halls. Nothing can erase that." Adaora cried openly then, leaning into the queen's lap like when she was small. "Do not send me away," she begged. Queen Ezine wept too. "I do not know what tomorrow is, but today you are in my arms." The kingdom divided quickly into camps. In the market square, men argued so loudly that traders stopped selling to listen. "Blood has spoken," one elder declared. "The true daughter must take her place at once." Another man shook his head. "Place? What place? Can carrying water teach palace law overnight?" A woman selling peppers interrupted. "And can sleeping on silk create wisdom? The poor girl has more sense than half the court." Younger men argued for Adaora. "She knows the palace ways. She knows alliances. She knows how nobles think." Others answered, "And she mocks nobles daily." Laughter followed. In palm wine houses, voices rose over cups. In farms, workers argued while planting. In courtyards, wives debated while cooking. The whole kingdom seemed split between blood and upbringing, birthright and lived life, law and love. King Eziodu called council. Ministers sat in 2 tense rows. Some demanded immediate public recognition of Chiamaka as heir. Others urged caution. "If we move too fast," warned one minister, "the people may see cruelty against Adaora." Another said, "If we delay, the people may think the throne rejects truth." The king listened with hard face and tired eyes. "Enough," he said at last. "This kingdom speaks as if these girls are objects to be placed on shelves. They are human lives." Yet even he knew a decision could not wait forever. Queen Ezine stood apart from all camps. She loved both girls and refused to choose with cruelty. When advisors suggested Adaora be moved quietly to a lesser residence, the queen's voice became still. "She will not be discarded like old cloth." When others suggested Chiamaka remain hidden until trained, the queen answered, "She will not be shamed for poverty she did not choose." One afternoon, she asked privately to meet Chiamaka. The girl entered the palace hall wearing clean but simple cloth, unsure where to look. Guards, servants, and nobles stared at her with open curiosity. Queen Ezine walked down from the raised seat herself, instead of summoning the girl upward. For a long moment, both simply looked at each other. The queen saw traces of herself in the eyes, shape of chin, and calm bearing. Chiamaka saw a woman she had known only from distance and market stories. Queen Ezine reached trembling hands. "May I?" Chiamaka nodded. The queen touched her cheeks and began to cry. All these years. Chiamaka also wept but said softly, "Do not cry for what cannot return." The queen pulled her into an embrace that carried lost years and fresh sorrow together. Then she stepped back and called for Adaora. Adaora entered slowly, face guarded. When she saw Chiamaka standing beside the queen, pain flashed through her eyes. Queen Ezine took one hand of each girl. "Look at me," she said. They did. "No one will force hatred between you while I breathe." Adaora looked away first. "Easy to say, harder to live." Chiamaka answered gently, "I did not come to steal what you love." Adaora laughed bitterly. "But truth did." Silence followed. Yet no cruelty came after it, only wounded honesty. Obina, though broken by betrayal, became fierce whenever anyone insulted Chiamaka's humble upbringing. One afternoon, near the market, 2 men mocked loudly. "A princess who smells of smoke and goat yard," one sneered. Maybe she will rule with a broom, said the other. Obina, passing with farm tools, stopped dead. He walked to them slowly. Say it again? They laughed. Old man, calm yourself. Obina dropped the tools and seized the first man by the wrapper front with strength born of pain. That girl carried my burdens when your sons were gambling. She shared food when your wives hid theirs. She speaks with more honor than your whole house. He shoved the man back. Call her poor again and I will teach your mouth manners. The crowd quickly separated them. People began to see that whatever blood said, Obina's heart would never surrender Chiamaka. Nneka was brought before the king for punishment. She looked smaller than before, as if guilt had eaten flesh from her bones. She knelt without being forced. My king, she said, voice rough from crying, punish me as you wish, only spare the children more suffering. King Ezeodo stared down at the woman who had stolen years from his house and yet raised his daughter through hardship. Rage and complexity fought in him. Do you ask mercy after what you did? Nneka bowed lower. I ask nothing for myself. Queen Ezine, seated beside the king, spoke through tears. No punishment can return first words, first steps, childhood nights. Nneka struck her forehead to the floor. I know. The hall was silent. At last the king rose. Nneka, wife of Obina, you committed a crime against crown, family, and truth. Yet death would teach nothing and heal nothing. You are banished from Umore at sunset. You will leave with only what you can carry. If you return without royal pardon, you will be imprisoned. Gasps moved through the hall. Nneka closed her eyes. The sentence was heavy, yet perhaps kinder than she expected. Thank you for sparing the children public blood, she whispered. She was led away. When Chiamaka heard of the banishment, she ran to find Nneka at the hut, packing a small cloth bundle with shaking hands. Mother, she began, then stopped, unsure which word belonged where anymore. Nneka turned and tears spilled instantly. Do not call me that if it wounds you. Chiamaka crossed the room and embraced her tightly. You wronged many people, she said through tears, but you also fed me when you were hungry. You stayed awake when I was sick. You carried me on your back. My heart cannot cut itself in two. Nneka sobbed into her shoulder. Forgive me if you can. I do not know how yet, answered Chiamaka honestly, but I still love you. Outside the hut, Obina stood rigid, unable to enter. Adaora came quietly from the road, having slipped away from palace watchers. She stopped at the doorway and looked at Nneka, the woman whose womb had borne her, yet whose arms had never raised her. Both stared as strangers tied by blood. Nneka fell to her knees. My daughter. Adaora stepped back in pain. Do not call me that so easily. Nneka lowered her head. You are right. After a moment, Adaora's voice softened. I do not know what you are to me. Tears rolled down her face. But I know you were desperate. Nneka looked up. That desperation poisoned all our lives. Adaora nodded slowly. Yes. It was not forgiveness, but it was not hatred. As sunset reddened the sky, villagers gathered quietly to watch. Nneka stepped onto the road carrying one bundle. No jewelry, no pride, no home behind her now. Chiamaka wept openly. Obina stood like stone, then finally said in a low voice, May the road teach you what my love could not. It was harsh and tender at once. Nneka looked at him with shattered gratitude. She whispered, You were the best man I knew. She turned and walked. No drum followed her. No one cheered. Dust rose around her feet as she moved beyond the edge of Umore. Back in the kingdom, neither girl knew where she belonged. Chiamaka was called princess, but longed for the simple life she loved. Adaora still slept in palace comfort, but felt every cushion uncertain. One had gained a crown she did not seek. One feared losing a family she did not steal. Both stood between worlds, carrying names that no longer felt certain. After the storm of secrets, another storm came. But this one did not begin in hearts or palaces. It began in the land itself. The rains that should have come early arrived late and weak. Clouds gathered many times, yet passed without mercy. Seeds placed in the soil waited and waited, then died where they lay. Young crops rose thin and yellow, then bent under heat. Rivers that once moved proudly became narrow lines of muddy water. Streams that children had splashed in became pools where women fought for buckets. Leaves curled on trees. Goats grew rib-thin. Birds flew farther in search of food. A season of famine had come to Umuarere, and it tested the kingdom more harshly than scandal had done. Hunger does not care about titles. It enters huts and mansions with the same cold hand. In the market square, baskets that once overflowed with yam, cassava, beans, and vegetables now stood half empty. Prices rose each week. Mothers argued with traders and left with tears instead of food. Men who had once laughed loudly now spoke in tired voices. Children cried more often. At night, smoke from cooking fires grew fewer because many pots held nothing worth boiling. In villages beyond the capital, anger rose with hunger. Messengers arrived at the palace carrying complaints. Our wells are dry. Our grain store was taken by rats. People steal from fields at night. 2 villages nearly fought over a stream. If help does not come, people will break palace stores by force. Ministers gathered daily in fear. King Ezeodo sat on the throne with lines deep across his face. He had weathered scandal, but famine was another enemy. Open the reserve stores, one advisor urged. Not all at once, warned another. If we empty now and rains fail again, we all starve later. Send guards to keep order, said another. Hungry people do not fear guards for long, replied another. Voices rose, accusations followed. The council became a room full of worry with no clear road out. Chiamaka sat quietly to one side. Invited now more often because blood had recognized her as royal, though many still doubted what role she should hold. She listened to the ministers speak about numbers, roads, punishment, and storage. Yet no one asked how mothers were feeding children that day. No one asked how far women walked now for water. No one asked which villages had old wells that could be repaired quickly. At last she rose. The hall grew still. Some ministers still disliked that a former village girl spoke among them. Chiamaka bowed first to the king. My father, may I speak? King Ezeodo studied her face, then nodded. Speak. Hunger is already in the houses while we argue at tables, she said calmly. If we wait for perfect plans, famine will make its own. A minister sniffed. And what would you suggest? She turned to him without fear. That we begin where suffering begins, in the farms, in the wells, in the homes. Another minister muttered, fine words. Chiamaka continued. Count every grain store in the kingdom, not just palace stores. Some villages still have hidden surplus. Organize sharing with record keepers so no chief steals from the weak. Reopen neglected wells before people fight at streams. Send hunters in groups to bring meat where fields failed. Reduce taxes this season. Let people breathe. Murmurs filled the hall. King Ezeodo sat on the throne with lines deep across his face. He had weathered scandal, but famine was another enemy. Who will do all this? King asked. I will begin, answered Chiamaka. Some laughed softly in disbelief. She did not react. Then go, said the king. Show us if wisdom can walk as well as speak. She bowed again and left that same day. Instead of hiding behind palace walls or waiting for ceremony, Chiamaka tied simple cloth around herself, gathered scribes, workers, and guards, and walked into the farms. People stared as she came not in jewels, but in dust. At the first village, she found women scraping dry soil with weak hands, hoping roots remained beneath. An old widow named Mama Ijoma sat beside an empty basket. What did you eat today? Chiamaka asked gently. Water, the woman replied. And yesterday? Hope. Chiamaka knelt beside her. You will eat grain before sunset. The widow laughed bitterly. From where? Chiamaka turned to the scribes. Write her name first. She moved from home to home, listening more than speaking. She learned which chiefs hoarded grain, which streams still trickled, which roads carts could pass, which children were already too weak to work. In another village, she found two men fighting over a bag of cassava peels. She stepped between them. If two starving men wound each other, hunger wins twice, she said. One man spat dust. Words do not fill stomachs. She nodded. Then help me carry sacks when they arrive. He stared, then lowered his eyes in shame. She sent riders back to the palace and ordered grain from stores released in measured shares. She placed honest widows and respected elders beside scribes to witness every distribution. No one leaves unseen, she said. No child is skipped because a father is absent. In places where old wells had collapsed, she organized labor crews. She herself lifted stones, tied rope and pulled mud. Seeing her hands dirty, villagers worked harder. If palace blood can sweat, one farmer said, then so can I. When the first repaired well filled with clear water, women ululated with relief. Chiamaka smiled, but moved immediately to the next village. Her calm leadership spread hope faster than fear. She did not shout, she did not boast. She listened, decided, and kept moving. Meanwhile, Adaora lived through her own battle. Since the truth had come out, she had struggled with where she belonged. Many still called her princess out of habit or affection, but some now used the title with mockery. Others avoided her entirely. She watched Chiamata step into crisis with purpose and felt both pride and pain. One morning, she entered her chamber, opened boxes of jewelry, and stared at necklaces, bangles, earrings, and gem-studded hairpieces collected through years of palace life. She touched them one by one. Then she called her maid. "Bring the traders." The maid gasped. "Princess." Adaora lifted a hand. "Bring them." By midday, trusted traders stood before her. She pointed to the boxes. "Take these. Sell them fairly. Use the money to buy seed grain, hose, medicine, dried fish, and cloth for bandages." One trader blinked in shock. "All of them?" She said, "Keep one bracelet. I need something to remember how heavy useless beauty feels." Word reached Queen Ezine, who hurried in. "Adaora, these were gifts from your childhood." Adaora met her eyes. "Then let my childhood feed someone." The queen began to cry quietly. Adaora embraced her. "Do not stop me, mother." Queen Ezine whispered, "I will not." Soon carts loaded with supplies rolled toward villages, but Adaora did not stay behind to receive praise. She went with them. Under the hard sun, she labored beside villagers who once knew her only as palace royalty. She tied cloth over her hair, lifted sacks, planted seeds, cleaned wounds, and stirred giant cooking pots. Her skin darkened under sun. Her hands blistered. She laughed when blisters burst. "Good," she said. "Now my hands look honest." In one village, a man sneered, "Can a palace bird survive heat?" Adaora grabbed a hoe and began digging beside him until he collapsed first. She handed him water. "Drink, palace bird killer." The crowd burst into laughter, and the man laughed too. In another place, children followed her everywhere. She taught them games while waiting for porridge to cook. She told stories at night beside fires. She scolded young men who tried to steal seed bags. "If you steal seed, you steal tomorrow," she said sharply. They returned the bags in shame. For the first time, many in the kingdom saw clearly the strength within both women. Chiamaka possessed natural wisdom, patience, and compassion fit for rulership. She could hear 10 voices, find the hidden truth among them, and act without cruelty. Adaora possessed courage, sacrifice, bold energy, and fierce love for ordinary people. She entered hard places without fear and made tired people laugh while working. Their gifts were different, but both were precious. One evening in a dry village near the western farms, Chiamaka arrived to inspect a reopened well and found Adaora already there stirring soup in a huge pot with village women. Sweat shone on Adaora's face. Dust covered her arms. "You missed a spot of mud," Chiamaka said. Adaora looked up and grinned. "There is mud everywhere. Be specific." Villagers laughed. Chiamaka took another spoon and joined her. For a moment, they worked side by side in easy silence. Then Adaora said softly, so only Chiamaka could hear, "You are good at this." Chamaka answered, "So are you." Adaora shrugged. "I thought losing titles would empty me." "Did it?" "No," she said after a pause. "It just made space." Chamaka smiled. "Then fill it well." They served bowls together until dark. Queen Ezine watched changes in both girls with eyes opened wider than before. One afternoon, she visited a relief camp where mothers and children waited for food. She saw Chiamaka kneeling to speak gently with a widow whose son was sick. Then she turned and saw Adaora carrying 2 water buckets while joking with boys. The queen's chest filled with painful gratitude. "I tried to choose in my heart," she confessed later to her maid, "but motherhood was never asking me to choose, it was asking me to love larger." She no longer said one daughter and another daughter in separate ways. She simply said, "My girls." Obina also changed. He had suffered deeply from Neka's betrayal. Yet, as famine spread, he watched Chemaka spend herself for strangers while still returning some evenings to ask if he had eaten. She brought him medicine when his joints hurt. She repaired the hot roof before rains might return. One night, he sat outside while she sorted grain bags for distribution. "You work like 3 people," he said. "Someone must," she replied. He was quiet a moment. Then he said, "I once thought fatherhood lived in blood. Then I learned blood can hide from a man, but love cannot. Whatever name others give you, you are my daughter until I die." Chamaka's eyes filled with tears. She knelt and rested her head on his knee like when she was younger. He stroked her hair in silence. Even King Eziodu began to see differently. At first, he had viewed everything through loss. Lost years, lost certainty, lost order. But now he rode through villages and saw Chamaka's plans restoring life where ministers had only argued. He saw Adaora covered in dust, laughing with laborers while unloading medicine she had paid for herself. He saw people bow to one out of trust and embrace the other out of affection. Returning to the palace, he stood long at a balcony overlooking the kingdom. Chief Nadozi approached carefully. "My king?" Eziodu spoke without turning. "I once believed destiny was a straight road. And now," asked the chief, "now I see it may be blocked, delayed, wounded, even stolen for a time." He finally turned, eyes softer than before, but not destroyed. The chief bowed. Wise truth. The famine did not end in 1 week or 1 month. Hunger fought stubbornly, but hope had returned, and hope worked harder than despair. New wells gave water. Shared grain kept children alive. Seeds entered the ground again when late rains finally began to whisper across the land. Villages that had threatened revolt now sent thanks. People no longer argued only about which girl deserved what title. They spoke instead of what each had done when the kingdom suffered. And under the first real rain in many months, Chamaka and Adaora stood in an open field, letting water soak their faces, while all around them dry earth began at last to soften. When the famine finally loosened its grip and peace returned to Umori, the kingdom breathed like a man rising after nearly drowning. Rains came in their proper season again. New shoots covered fields that had once looked dead. Streams grew stronger and clear enough for children to splash in once more. Markets filled slowly with food, laughter, and bargaining voices. Cooking smoke rose from many homes at evening. Drums were heard again, not in warning or sorrow, but in celebration of survival. Yet one matter still stood before the people like a tree blocking the road. Who would guide Umori into the future? The secret of the exchanged children had been revealed. The famine had shown the hearts of both young women. Now the elders had to decide openly what rumor, pain, and delay had kept unsettled for too long. So messengers were sent across farms, villages, and roads, calling all chiefs, titled men, wise women, guild leaders, priests, hunters, and respected elders to gather beneath the great Nuku tree in the center of the kingdom. That ancient tree was older than memory. Its roots rose like coiled snakes from the earth. Its branches spread wide enough to shade hundreds. Many kings had received counsel there. Many disputes had ended there. Many truths had been spoken there because people believed lies grew weak beneath its shadow. On the chosen day, the whole kingdom seemed to move toward it. Chiefs came with staffs and followers. Women leaders came in fine wrappers and head ties. Farmers came dusty from fields. Traders came with curious eyes. Children climbed nearby stones and walls to watch. Drummers played softly as people gathered. Guards kept space clear in the center. King Ezeodo arrived with Queen Ezine beside him. Chiamaka came dressed simply but beautifully, carrying herself with calm grace. Adaora came beside her, not behind her, wearing modest royal cloth with head high and eyes clear. Obina came too, slower now but steady. Many whispered when they saw both daughters walking together without hatred. When all had settled, the oldest elder in Umuori rose. His voice was thin with age, yet carried across the crowd. People of Umuari, we gather not to reopen wounds, but to close them with wisdom. Blood has spoken. Character has spoken. Suffering has spoken. We must now speak. One by one, elders gave counsel. Some reminded the people that truth must be honored or no throne could stand long. Others said leadership was not only blood, but tested heart. Women leaders praised Chiamaka for walking into famine villages when others stayed behind walls. Hunters praised Adaora for laboring beside common people without pride. A widow stood unexpectedly and asked to speak. Permission was given. When my children were hungry, Chiamaka wrote our names and grain came. When my roof fell, Adaora carried wood with us. I do not know palace laws. I know kindness. Choose with that also. Murmurs of agreement moved through the crowd. Then King Ezeldo stood. The noise died at once. I am a king, he said slowly, but I am also a man who was humbled by life. I lost years through deception. I nearly lost peace through pride. I have watched these two young women in trial. One carries the blood of my house and the wisdom of hardship. One carries no blood of my line, yet she carries courage that honors any house. Today I ask the elders to decide without fear and without flattery. He sat. The council withdrew for long discussion beneath a smaller canopy nearby. The crowd waited under sun and shade, talking softly, guessing outcomes, praying, arguing, then falling silent whenever the drummers paused. Chiamaka stood still, though her heart beat fast. Adora touched her hand once. You look calmer than I feel, Adora whispered. Chiamaka replied, Inside I am thunder. Adora laughed softly. Good, then I am not alone. Queen Ezine watched both girls with tears hidden behind dignity. Obina stood with arms folded, staring at the earth, as if roots might advise him. At last, the elders returned. The oldest among them carried a carved staff and raised it high. Here the decision of Umuore, even birds seemed to hush. By blood rightly proven, by signs witnessed, by truth uncovered, and by character tested before famine and sorrow, Chiamaka is declared rightful heir to Umuori. A great sound rose from the people. Cheers, cries, drums, ululations, relief. Some wept openly, others bowed. Chiamaka closed her eyes briefly as if receiving both weight and wind together. The elder continued, Let no one say birth alone made this day. Her deeds also speak. Then attendants brought forward the crown cloth, coral beads, and staff of authority prepared for succession. Queen Ezine herself stepped forward to place the first beads around Chiamaka's neck. Her hands trembled. My daughter, she whispered. Chiamaka took her hands and kissed them before bowing. King Ezeudo placed the royal staff in Chiamaka's hands. Carry it straighter than I did, he said quietly. Chiamaka answered, I will try. Priests offered blessings. Elders poured libation to the ancestors. Drums thundered so strongly that children squealed with delight. Women danced. Men shouted praise. Chamaka was crowned before the people beneath the great tree, not as a child stolen and returned, but as a woman proven through fire. Yet before celebration could fully begin, Chamaka raised her hand for silence. The crowd quieted slowly. She stepped forward holding the staff. "People of Umuori," she said, voice clear and steady, "today you give me honor. I accept it with gratitude and fear, because leadership is heavy. But if truth brought me here, truth must guide my first act." She turned and held out her hand toward Adora. Mama spread. Adora looked surprised. Chamaka continued, "This woman beside me lost as much as I did. She was raised to duties she did not steal. She served the hungry when many watched from shade. She knows roads I never walked and hearts I had not yet met. She is not my rival. She is my sister in suffering and in strength." Tears sprang into many eyes. "Therefore, I raise Adora beside me as royal sister and chief guardian of the people, so that no voice from market, farm, widow's yard, or labor field is ever unheard in this palace again." The crowd exploded with approval. Even those who had supported Adora cheered. Adora stood motionless for a moment, overwhelmed. Then she stepped forward slowly. Some wondered if bitterness still lived in her. Instead, she knelt before Chamaka, not in humiliation but in respect freely chosen. "I accept," she said. Her voice shook but did not break. "Not because I lost a crown, but because I found myself." Chamaka quickly lifted her up. "Never kneel to me alone," she whispered. "Stand with me." Adora smiled through tears. "Then move over. You take too much space." Laughter rolled warmly through the gathering. Queen Ezine could no longer hide tears. She embraced both daughters before all the people. "My girls," she said again and again. King Ezeudo looked upward and let out a long breath as if a stone had finally left his chest. Later that same day, another matter was brought before the assembly. Nneka, returned under guard from the place of banishment when summoned for final judgment, stood thin and humbled. Travel, grief, and years of guilt had marked her face deeply. She bowed low and did not raise her eyes. "I deserve nothing," she said before anyone asked. "Give what justice requires." Some in the crowd demanded harsh punishment still. Others, softened by time and famine, asked for mercy. Chamaka looked at the woman who had wronged many lives, yet also loved her in broken ways. Adora looked too, face unreadable. Obinna stood apart, jaw tight. Chamaka spoke first. "Death teaches little now. Pain has already taught much." She turned to the elders. "Let the hunger that drove the crime be fought by the hands that committed it." The eldest elder nodded slowly. Wise. The judgment was declared. Nneka would be spared death, but sentenced to years of service feeding the poor, cooking in public kitchens, carrying grain, cleaning storehouses, and caring for widows and orphans. She would eat only after others had eaten each day. Nneka fell to the ground, weeping with gratitude and shame. "Thank you," she cried. "Thank you for letting me spend my remaining life usefully." Obinna did not move toward her then, but as she was led away, he said quietly, without looking at her, "Serve well." She froze, then nodded through tears. It was not forgiveness yet, but it was the first bridge plank laid across deep water. Time moved on. In the months that followed, the palace changed in spirit. Doors once closed to common voices were opened weekly. Chamaka ordered that any widow, farmer, trader, or laborer could bring petitions on appointed days without bribing guards. She walked palace stores herself and counted sacks. She reduced wasteful ceremonies during lean seasons. She created teams to maintain wells before they failed. She ordered roofs repaired in poor quarters before new carvings were made for royal halls. "A leaking hut is also the kingdom," she said, when ministers protested costs. Because she had known hunger, no food was casually thrown away in her reign. Because she had carried water, no broken well was considered small matter. Because she had worn patched cloth, taxes on the poorest were reviewed with fairness. Adora, as chief guardian of the people, became the bridge between throne and street. She visited markets without warning, listened to complaints, exposed corrupt officials loudly, and returned laughing from muddy roads with real news no polished report would ever contain. "Your Majesty," ministers would begin, stiffly. "Do not call me Majesty," Adora replied. "Save that for the one with beads. Call me when you have done your work." She remained bold, but wisdom now guided her boldness. Queen Ezine moved through the palace like a woman healed in one place and scarred in another. She kept rooms for both daughters near her own. Some evenings the three sat together sharing stories, palace foolishness, village memories, childhood mistakes, lost years and new hopes. Sometimes they laughed until servants smiled outside doors. Sometimes they cried quietly. Both were holy. King Ezeodu softened with age. He sought Chiamaka's counsel more than he gave commands. He listened when Adaora criticized him bluntly. "You are stubborn," she told him once. He snorted, "Where?" She laughed and hugged him. Obina slowly forgave Neka, though scars remained. At first, he only spoke to her when duty required. Later, he would leave small bundles of yam near the kitchen where she served the poor. Much later still, he sat one evening while she stirred a giant pot for widows and children. Neither spoke for long minutes. Then he said, "You ruined much." Tears filled her eyes. "I know," he added quietly. "You also loved much, though badly." She began to sob. He looked away toward the sunset. "I am tired of carrying hatred. It is heavier than farm tools." That was the nearest thing to full forgiveness he could offer, and it was enough to begin peace. Under Queen Chiamaka's reign, Umuore prospered. Harvests improved because irrigation and storage were planned wisely. Roads were repaired. Theft decreased because hungry people were not abandoned. Markets grew busy with traders from distant lands who heard the kingdom was fair. Festivals returned brighter than before, now marked by gratitude rather than pride alone. Children born in poor huts were registered and protected. Orphans were fed. Palace guards were taught that power without kindness dishonored the crown. When Chiamaka sat on the throne, she never forgot the feel of mud floors or smoke in eyes. When she walked among common people, she never forgot the weight of royal duty. She understood both palace walls and leaking roofs, and because of that, the kingdom trusted her. As years became generations, elders told the story of the switched children beneath moonlight to those who came after. They told it as warning and comfort together. Poverty can tempt the heart into darkness. Lies can wound many lives and steal years that never return. But true destiny, truth and love are patient travelers. However long delayed, they will always find their way home. The moral lesson of this story is that poverty and fear can push people into terrible choices, but lies never stay hidden forever. True greatness is not only by birth or wealth, but by character, kindness, sacrifice, and wisdom. No matter how long truth is delayed, it will rise in its own time, and love, forgiveness, and justice can heal even the deepest wounds. Thanks for watching this amazing story on African Stories by V. If you liked it and felt inspired, please show your support by clicking the like button, sharing with your friends, and leaving a comment below. To see more interesting stories and learn about different cultures, subscribe to African Stories by V and don't forget to ring the notification bell so you never miss a new story. Your support means a lot and helps us bring more stories to you. Until we meet again, stay connected, stay inspired, and keep smiling.